So welcome. We hope to do a series of webinars along the same topic. This one is about zero trust and application onboarding, getting your applications into Azure, turning the zero trust process, the zero trust principles and applying them to application onboarding. Later, we're going to talk about application administration through zero trust, and then eventually end user self-service and other concepts around zero trust as well, maybe recertification, et cetera. So our talk today will focus on that. It's the first in a series. Our speakers, I'm Patrick Parker. I'm the CEO and co-founder of EmpowerID. EmpowerID is an identity and access management company that covers IGA, access management, and privileged access management. And I head up the product team. So I work with the smart brains like we have on the call today that help us design the product and the features. So with us on the call today, one of our speakers will be Arti Raghavendra. Arti is an architect and product manager. She's on the product team at EmpowerID. She's over 10 years experience in the industry. She has a master's in computer science from University of Cincinnati. And she is very focused on Azure and all things Azure related. So she'll be talking and sharing her expertise. She's also an expert on EmpowerID and EmpowerID's identity orchestration or workflow platform as well. Also on the call, we have Frank Molinar. Frank Molinar is a solution architect. He is an expert on the Azure AD and Azure infrastructure side of things, as well as the security. He is a TOGAF 9 certified professional. He's also a CISSP, and he has lots of certifications on Azure. So he has deep expertise into the Azure infrastructure. So he'll be talking about what is Azure application, what are Azure applications, how do they work, what does onboarding mean, and some of that. So let's just dive in. So that's the team here. If anybody wants to say hi, feel free to just say hi to the audience.
Hey everyone, and just to tell a few quick words. Thanks, Patrick, for the quick introduction, and thank you everyone for taking the time out today and joining our webinar. Patrick, off to you.
Hope you'll enjoy the content.
Yep, definitely. And if we were meeting in person, I think Frank, we'd be bringing some Stroop waffles for the Frank's from Netherlands, by the way. That's inside joke. Very good Stroop waffles. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's dive into our topic. Hold on here. Okay, so let's talk about zero trust. So the focus is on Azure and applications running on Azure, but more specifically on how we can onboard them using zero trust principles. So before I describe what is zero trust, I think you've all probably heard about it a lot recently. I think a lot of articles have said that zero trust has gone from what was considered maybe a fad and a buzzword to universal adoption very, very quickly. A lot of this has been pushed by government mandates from various countries. In the United States here, the White House issued a memo on executive order on their federal zero trust strategy in January 26th of 2022. And that really set a lot of things in motion for the American defense agencies and then anybody who works with them. One thing that Biden said in the memo was that incremental improvements will not give us the security we need. Instead, the federal government needs to make bold changes and significant investments in order to defend vital institutions that underpin the American way of life. So very, very big pronouncement, not typically something you'd have for a technology or an idea. So a bold move and a big push there. Following that, the Department of Defense in the United States released their Zero Trust Strategy white paper on November 7th of 2022. And then in August of 2022, a study by Okta, who did a survey, 97% of businesses either have a zero trust initiative in place or are starting one within the next 12 months. So basically universal adoption. And then Gartner predicts zero trust networking will be the fastest growing network security segment worldwide. So lots of momentum here. We've gone way beyond the hype cycle to where it is just hype. Now it's basically just everybody's trying to implement zero trust and see where it fits and where it makes sense. So if everybody's getting on board, what is zero trust? So zero trust, there's a lot of confusion sometimes when you talk about zero trust because it has changed over time. The original idea behind Zero Trust was focused on networking. The idea that traditional networks, the firewall was the perimeter. It guarded you like a castle and a moat. Everybody outside were dangerous, but once you were inside the walls, you were completely trusted. We're not going to check your security, check anything again. And that assumption is really, with the cloud and people with mobile devices and partners coming in, has really just broken down. You can't say once you're inside, you're trusted, because there's an insider threat, and there's no real inside anymore. Kind of the network's turned inside out with things moving out to various cloud providers. So Zero Trust was based on the idea that networking wise, you should only ever have network access if you to exactly what you need. So the idea was that based on the networks and microsegmentation, the idea that your network should be segmented into tiny little segments where the only traffic allowed was if it was for a good purpose. So if I'm a user, I don't need IP connectivity to all the ports on all the servers. I should only have access exactly to what I need, maybe gateways, and then they have access to what they need, so that if malware infects me, it can't spread laterally just by scanning ports and infecting other systems, because I'm kind of network segmented off. Now that was to protect against lateral movement. Now that's changed. The same analyst at Forrester who coined Zero Trust, John Kinderbag, he also said identity is the new perimeter. So the idea was that the way with mobile devices and users and applications existing everywhere, that really instead of protecting from a network concept level, you really had to move it to the identity level, so that each user's identity accessing every different thing needed to be strongly authenticated, needed to have multi-factor continuous access control or re-verification or risk analysis, and then also least privilege. So shifting the focus from a network concept to more the identity concept. That your identity and your authentication and verification at each point and continuously is a better model than just controlling network traffic. And again, of course, never trust, always verify. Now, an enhancement to that by Gartner is to take it a step further as far as access management goes, is the concept of zero standing privilege. So it's based on Zero Trust, and it's the idea that you should only ever have the access you need to do exactly what you need and no more, and only for the time that you're going to be using that access. So when everybody goes home at night, there are no privileged admins, no risky access for hackers to try to break in. And if you're on vacation, of course, there's no risky access. So that's an enhancement to Zero Trust that we'll talk about as well. So what does this all have to do with Azure and application onboarding? There's been a massive move from legacy on-premise applications to try to move them to Azure, to use Azure as the infrastructure, the authentication source, the identity provider, and the strong authentication source. And what's driving that is really from a survey that Microsoft did, 82% of the respondents said that this move was central to enabling their digital transformation strategies. That without having the applications on legacy infrastructure, legacy identity models, that it really didn't give them the flexibility to move quickly for digital transformation. Also, modernization was the key focus, to lower cost and to make things more quicker, faster deployments, faster rollout of services to customers. So what does it mean to migrate or onboard applications? There are 4 patterns. We're really going to focus, and Artie will dive into that, on configuring existing applications without code modifications. But the main patterns are to rehost, which is often called the lift and shift, is to move it as is to Azure and have it use Azure for authentication and strong security, and as is migration. There's the refactor model where you repackage it as an Azure app service or maybe as a container running on Azure Kubernetes. A little bit more work, but a little bit more modern. You could re-architect an existing app to try to completely modernize it, or you could just start from scratch and build a new app. And of course, those strategies depend on cost, whether you're going to replace the application with something else in the future, and how much access you have to the code and the ROI of changing it. So we're going to talk about the trends, what does it mean to onboard applications, why you do it. So let's move on to the next step, and I will hand off to another presenter.
Okay, so I will talk a little bit about the benefits of migration and what we see as main challenges with a lot of our customers. And so, like Patrick mentioned, a lot of the customers that we see and talk to primarily start migrations to Azure as part of digital transformation because it gives them speed, agility, and because it's cloud, a lot of features that they otherwise would need to build on their on-premise data centers. For example, firewalls, for example, perimeter compliance. Um, those are all those come all, most in most clouds come as a part of the offering, right? So if you look at Azure, there's Azure AD that has a lot of built-in security features that you can use and start using as a customer. There's the Azure MFA, which would otherwise be an implementation on-prem. There's conditional access controls. There's a lot of logging and monitoring that's around that you all can just consume as part of your cloud transformation. And I think that's why a lot of customers actually are considering and doing cloud transformation as part of their uh, journey to a more digital workplace. Now, what you see as challenges and obstacles, but most of them, if you look at legacy applications, cloud is not the same as on-prem. So there's a lot of, if you truly have legacy applications, then they need to either start talking new protocols or they need to be able to actually be running on cloud infrastructure. And then there's the other side of things that if you look at a zero trust can be based on networking controls, but you can also base it on identity controls, and that is a total shift in mindset for a lot of customers, where everything on-prem is basically secured with a large firewall at the perimeter, like the castle and the moat analogy. But as soon as you move to cloud, everything is open, and you as a customer need to secure your stuff that you put in there. And that's where, in most cases, a shift in mindset is needed. Moving away from firewalls as being the primary way of dealing with security, but more moving towards an identity-centric security model. And that brings in and that has challenges and obstacles for a lot of those customers because, yeah, like I said, it's a shift in mindset to actually start moving those applications. And then, of course, there's the migration itself, which in most cases requires a decision tree basically on what kind of application do I have currently, how does it, what's the code base, how do I want to migrate it. If you one of the drivers for application or cloud migration is also cost. So if you want to improve the ROI, make sure that you of the applications, make sure that the application is only running when you need it, because otherwise, if you look at an on-prem data center with virtualization layers, etc., then in most cases um, uh, it's running all of the time, and if you want to overcommit your resources, then you're free to do so. But in cloud, you get always charged by what you actually use. So it also that is part of in most cases considered some sort of an obstacle for a lot of customers because it actually means that you have to think about, hey, do I have to really have 4 environments for my application? Do I really need a development, test, acceptance, and a production environment, or do I need to have them always on? That sort of stuff. All those considerations come into play if you really want to use a lot of the benefits of cloud. Um, there's a lot of they come as offerings in cloud providers, but you still have to manage, maintain, and make good use of those offerings. So yeah, there's a lot of goodness there, but applying zero trust is then also needs a different mindset from doing it on-prem. And I guess that's when you're trying to onboard your Azure applications, then if we zoom into that a little bit, then onboarding applications requires a large bulk of permissions. So you need a lot of permissions to actually onboard applications, and in a zero trust way, you would actually reduce the amount of standing privilege. And so that's where a lot of companies also struggle. How do we actually start onboarding those applications, do the maintenance on the applications? How do we rotate keys and secrets, and how do we grant permissions, etc.? And I think that a lot of companies start looking for tools to actually provide that additional layer of security on top of what Azure offers, to give them those additional controls that either that they require or that they need to actually implement those additional layers of security, or to actually do zero trust. And with that, I think it's time to hand it over to Artie so she can actually walk you through what Empower ID can offer.
Awesome.
Sure.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks.
One thing
Thanks,
before
Frank.
just one of the concepts in zero trust or zero standing privileges that we're trying to implement here is never giving them the privilege. So never actually giving native direct privileges in Azure, adding a proxy layer in the middle where you can do really least privilege fine-grained access control, implement your business logic, and have enhanced logging auditing without ever granting native permissions. And RT, why don't you show us what that looks like?
Sure, sounds good. So before we jump right into the demo, I'd like to lay the ground and talk a little about what an app registration is and how does Azure use this concept for authenticating users. So usually organizations, they offload the task of authenticating and authorizing users to external IDPs. So in this case, you'll have Empower ID, Azure AD, or Okta for that example. And the purpose of doing this is usually because IDPs offer more robust security features like multi-factor authentication. You'll have role-based access control, conditional access policies, policy-based access controls, etc., and among many others. And these help organizations in protecting their resources and their data as well. And additionally, all these providers, you have cloud-based solutions, so it is easy for these solutions to scale and accommodate organizations of any size. And it usually makes it ideal for organizations, that need to support a growing number of users or applications or devices. And if you look at it from a simplified management perspective, these platforms also offer a centralized management portal for managing users, groups, applications, devices, the whole deal. And it reduces the burden on your IT staff eventually. So now that you have your IDP and your organization has, let's say, a bunch of client applications, usually you can have CRM apps, ERP apps, you can have content management apps such as Drupal, WordPress, etc. And you need your end users to access these applications securely so that, and it communicates with the IDP in a trusted fashion. So this is where the concept of an app registration comes into play. So when the first step that's involved in establishing a trust between your client application and your IDP, in this case being, let's say, Azure AD, would be to create this app registration. So for example, if your organization has 10 applications that you want to federate with Azure AD, then you would create 10 app registrations, one for each of them. So let's jump. Before we jump into what Empower ID can offer, I want to show you what an app registration looks like in Azure. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. All right, perfect. So you should see the Azure portal over here.
But
And this is,
I'm not seeing it, Darcy. I'm just seeing your camera. Is anybody else seeing the screen?
I'm seeing the screen, but for me, the camera is black.
Okay, I have a delay. Hold on. It's switching to now.
Mhm.
Just have a little lag.
How about now, Patrick?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, awesome. So this is the Azure AD portal where you can see your app registrations. This is a list of all your existing app registrations, and you can go here and create a new app reg. So let me just go ahead and create one, for example, right? So I want to show you what it looks like in Azure, and then I'll give you an overview of what you can do via Empower ID. So after you create your app registration, there are a few key reference settings that everyone has to be aware of. The first one is your client ID. The client ID is a unique identifier for each app registration. So in the example of 10 apps, you would create 10 app registrations, and this is the ID that is used to uniquely identify your app. And then the next one is your client credentials. Client credentials are usually used for the application to authenticate with Azure AD. So in this case, your app would use a combination of your client ID and either a client secret or a certificate to authenticate and then make any API calls or any subsequent calls. The next one is your owners. Owners are a list of users who belong within the tenant, and these users usually define who can manage this application. Now they will have the ability to manage various aspects of the app, such as, let's say, creating and updating secrets, updating any properties, updating your redirect URIs, and things like that. And then another one would be your API permissions. Now, this is an important bit. API permissions are a set of privileges and access rights that are granted to your application. And they are tailored to meet specific needs of the application in order to perform, let's say, specific tasks such as, and to access certain resources. So for example, if you have an application and you want to use, and you want to read user data, then you would create permissions so that the application can read user data, read and write user profile, or read directory data, and things like that. And you can also scope it at particular resources, such as, let's say, the Microsoft Graph or Azure Resource Manager and Azure Cosmos DB and things like that. And then the other one, the other important bit of configuration when it comes to app registration are token claims. Token claims are a set of attributes and properties that are included within the security token that is issued by this app registration. Now, usually token claims contain information about the user. So you can have their email address, their name, their role, permissions, the groups that they're a member of, and things like that. And what the application usually does is it decodes the token, it reads this data, and then it does certain set of actions based on it. So your token claims are used to enable fine-grained access control to make sure that only authorized users can access sensitive data. Now, you want to make sure you do not stuff the token with a lot of information. You don't want to bloat the token, but that's a topic for another day. So on a high level, this is what an app registration is, and this is how you can configure various settings within your app registration in Azure. Now, if you look at this, I'm logged in here and I can see all of these apps. I can modify apps that I'm not an owner of, and I can change settings and things like that. So usually what organizations do is they refrain from giving users direct access to Azure in order to create app registrations and manage app and configure them, because this could lead to potential security risks. And let's say without proper training and knowledge of Azure security best practices, users may inadvertently create app registrations with overly permissive permissions, or you can misconfigure them, which can leave your app vulnerable to attacks such as data breaches or unauthorized access. And also it results in a lack of centralized visibility and the control over the organization's applications, which makes it difficult to manage access and enforce security policies. So given these issues, a better approach is to establish a centralized and a controlled process for creating and configuring your app registrations. And this will help in ensuring that you have consistency and you have security across the board within the organization. So this is the gap that Empower ID will step in and can bridge this particular gap for you. So what Empower ID can do is it will help you mitigate these issues by implementing, all the zero trust policies that Patrick and Frank were talking about. And it also provides a means for non-technical users to walk through the control process, whereby they can request and create app registrations without being given direct access into Azure itself. So having said that, let's step into the demo part of the webinar. So this over here, this portal that you're looking at right now, this is the Empower ID Resource Admin. So this is an admin portal, anyone, and you can come in here and you can create different resources, you can manage various resources, and you can see a list of all the existing. So in this case, since we're talking about app registrations, let me stick with that. So this is where you will see a list of all the Azure app registrations that were created within a particular tenant or multiple tenants. You can filter it accordingly, and you can say, I want to see only applications that are owned by me or by someone else, and you can filter it further to say show me only Azure apps. I do not want to see, let's say, applications that were created for some other purpose. So this is the viewing part. So now let's get into the demo. So now when you look at the workflows, the workflow section, these are a bunch of the workflows that we ship with, where you can onboard apps, you can create various components within your application, and you can configure them. So this workflow here, the one that said onboard Azure application, this is the equivalent of what you see in here when you click a new app registration. Now, unlike Azure, where you need to have multiple steps involved to create and configure your application, as a part of the workflow here, you can set all the application information in one single go without having to do it as a step-by-step process. And this is what we refer to as a wizard workflow in the Empower ID context. And what this means is it gives you the ability to navigate back and forth between the various steps of the workflow. And then let's say if you want you're on owners and deputies, and then you realize you want to go back and refer to what's your app name, then this gives you the ability to navigate. So now let's come to this. So the first part of the application that you see here is you're trying to ask what sort of application are you trying to onboard? What is the purpose? And what is the protocol that is going to be used by this app? Is it a OIDC app? Is it a SAML non-gallery app or a gallery app? So because OIDC is more prevalent now and is more commonly used as SAML, so I'll just go ahead and use OIDC for this demo. The next bit that you see here is saying which environment are you targeting this app for? Is it for dev, production, UAT, QA? Now, on this particular setting here, this is configurable. You can customize it to either change the settings, or you can not have the setting at all if required. So let me go ahead and select dev. The next section that you see here are the tenants. Now, Empower ID allows you to inventory multiple tenants within one single ecosystem. So over here, because the tenant that I'm working with over here, we have inventory 2 tenants. One is the contractors and EID docs. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to select contractors. And this here is location within our tree structure. So what that means, so this is an Empower ID only related value. This has got nothing to do with Azure. Now, because application is a protected resource within Empower ID, we have to associate it with a particular location. So that's what this is. But this is not going to affect how or where the app gets created in Azure. So once you've configured your initial data, the next step is you want to enter the name of your app and who is the audience for this app. So for this demo, let me say, so I'm just going to add a name, and then you can have a description here. And then you can say, like I said, what is the supported account type? Is it a single tenant, meaning only users within this tenant can access this app, or it can be a multi-tenant application as well. So you will have all of your settings. You can select one of them. So for this example, I'm going to go with a single tenant. Now, this bit here are your owners, which is the section that we were looking at in here. So owners that are in Azure is what we refer to as native owners, and the users that you select here end up becoming the native owners for your app registration in Azure. So if you can see here, this shows a list of all the accounts that have been inventoried within that tenant. So you have a lot of users. So let me just go ahead and select one of them. And we also have a concept of deputies. A deputy is someone you can choose to either become a native owner in Azure, or you can configure Empower ID in such a way that deputies only can come up with certain roles within your app registration. So not everyone becomes a native owner, but the owner here is your native owner, whereas the deputies get a specific role, basically a specific administrative role for that app registration. So for this example, let me say I have this user. Now with the current configuration, both the owners and deputies become native owners, but like I said, you can change it differently if you need. So after you select your owners and deputies, this is the application authentication part, which is nothing but the section that you see here. So over here, you can select what sort of app platform is this? Is it a web-based, single page, or mobile and desktop application? So I'm going to go ahead and say this is a web app. And then in here, I can have my redirect URI. I'll just go ahead and say something like this. Now you can also have, we also have validations on the field. So in case if any particular value is incorrect, then you can change it on the run rather than entering the wrong value and then the app registration failing because of that. And then you specify your logout URL. And because this is a OIDC application, you have these options over here. So let's say for this particular app that I'm creating, I want to issue ID token and access token, but I do not want to enable the public client flow. And additionally, you can say who is going to access this application, and then is it enabled for users to sign in. So let's say for this scenario, I do not want the assignment required. So what this basically means is any user can sign in to this application and they do not have to be given explicit permissions itself. So that's what my app, so this is how I can configure the app. And again, you can change this based on the app registration that you're creating and the purposes for it. The next bit that you see here is IAM shop settings. Now, the concept of IAM shops is something that's only for Empower ID. It doesn't apply for the settings that you configure here do not apply in Azure. So what this basically means is IAM shop is a place for end users. So just like resource admin is for administrators, you have an end users only microservice, which is known as IAM shop. And this is where end users who are given access to a particular app or any resource can go in and they can request access. And then that access can go to approval for, let me show you. Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. So you can go there and you can see what are all the, as an end user, what are the permissions that you have, what are the access, the resource access that you have, and you can come in here and you can request access to various applications, you can have groups, you can have a bunch of other resources as well. So that's what this setting does. And when you mark application as requestable, then you can have access request policy associated with it, and you can select the type of eligible assignees as well. So in here, you can say any person who belongs to a particular management role, I want all of them to be given access so that they can request this resource in IAM shop. Or you can have a pre-approved assignee as well, and you can have suggested. So for this case, let's just say, I have a management role and everyone within this management role should be able to access the resource. Or
I mentioned right here.
Yes, please.
So just one thing about this eligibility, the type pre-approved. Pre-approved means that is to support zero standing privilege or just-in-time access. That means that you are authorized. It's kind of like PIM, privileged identity management. You're authorized to have this access, but you're not always going to have the access. You're not going to be a permanent member, but you can go into the IAM shop and click to activate it for just-in-time, time-limited access, and just when you need it. So again, that's a security feature to help push towards zero standing privilege. But thanks, Arti. Back to you.
Sure. So now you can, so you have this option, and then let's say you do not want to make this app requestable at all, for anyone to access with an IAM shop, then you would come in here and just uncheck this, and this application is no longer going to be visible in IAM shop for anyone to access. But an administrator can still come in and modify it via resource admin. So now that you've configured all of your settings, you have a summary page, and this is where you will see a read-only list of all the settings that you have configured so far. Application extension is one of the fields that's currently not configured, but you can have it configured. So now let's say as a part of this, you see in here and you see you made a mistake or something that was incorrect. Then you can, so this is where uh, the wizard workflow comes into play that allows you to move back and forth within the workflow to make your changes and then come back to the summary to see if your changes have been corrected. So now that you are on the summary page and you know everything looks good, you are good to click on submit. Now the submit does a lot more than just creating your app registration. So unlike Azure, where you have multiple steps in here, and like I mentioned, via this workflow, you get to configure everything in one single go. On submit, there are multiple actions. So the first thing that happens is we call out to our Azure AD microservice. The microservice this is a SCIM microservice that calls out to the Graph API. So and as a part of this call, you first have to create your app registration. After the app registration has been created, it creates a service principal in the background. And then because you selected your owners and deputies, it adds those users as native owners. All the settings that you've created in your application authentication, those get reflected. So all those actions first happen in Azure. And after the resource gets created, that is when, as a follow-up step, we create the subsequent objects within our ecosystem as well. So this now is going to get registered in our database, and then the admin and the end user can go in and start working with it. So this is the success message that you see once the app has been created. So as a part of this, you're going to see a success message here, and then let's come back. And if we look at the application here, yeah. So now this is the app that was created. As you can see, you have your responsible party who was selected, you have your owners, you have your deputies, you have access to the client ID, which is your app ID. This is the value that you would actually give out to the developer so that they can work with this application. And once you've created the app, then as an admin or anyone who has access, you would come in here and you would create your subsequent objects, such as your client secrets, you would create your certificates, scopes, roles, API permissions, all the options that you see in Azure, can come here, create, manage, edit, and all the whole deal. Now, because these are protected resources within our system, let me go back and show you something, and then I'll come back. So if you pick an application here, we have something known as contextual actions. These are basically workflows that you can run that enable you to, for like in this example, that allows you to create a client secret or delete a client secret. Now, these are contextual actions, meaning only if you have the permission to view this action, will you be able to see it. For example, because I'm an administrator, I can come in and I see these options, but if I'm not, I might only see edit, but I might not see the other two options. And because we have to wait for RBAC to run, and for a newly created app, you might have to wait for maybe 2 or 3 minutes for the options to show up in your contextual actions. Otherwise, initially, you won't be able to see it immediately, just a few minutes. So now let's go back to Azure, and then let's look at the application. So this is the demo. Sorry, let me just go ahead and close this. So this is the demo app that has been created here. And all the callback URLs, the front channel logout URL, the 2 options that we selected, the supported account type, everything gets reflected. Similarly, if you look at the owners, because like I said, we have configured the workflow to have both the owners and deputies as native owners, both of them show up over here. And any options that you configure here eventually, they are going to reflect accordingly in Azure and in the specific options. So the whole point about the part of this demo is that you, as a user, you do not need to have access to Azure at all. And you can create all these options directly within the Empower ID UI. And all of these actions are obviously audited. So this is the admin dashboard. So this is where you not only have access to a subset of object, but you can manage just about everything that Empower ID offers, provided you're logged in as a admin. Again, all of these are security trimmed. If you're an end user, or if you're a security admin, or if you're just someone who has access to a subset of this, you're not going to see all these options. So with respect to the app, so because we have created the app, we set the owners, we set the deputies, you can see each of the actions have been logged in here. And you can see who did these actions and who was the resource and against what sort of object were you working with. So each of these actions get logged, so you can use it for reporting purposes or auditing purposes. So this is what the workflow looks like. And like I said, along with Onboard, you have other workflows as well. We'll get to the other workflows as a part of the future webinar series, where we'll address additional concepts on all of this. So from a demo standpoint, this is how the workflow has been created, how the workflow behaves. Now, let me jump in a little and talk about how did we develop this workflow. So Empower ID has Empower ID, we have the Empower ID identity and orchestration toolkit, which allows developers to create workflows in a more flexible and easy fashion. So this is the toolkit that we have. And the workflow that you had seen, the one that we just ran through, is this entire workflow that has been created using via the toolkit. So each and every step that you saw, where you entered your name, your owners and deputies, and all the settings, your summary page, all of them represent single forms over here. And the toolkit is very flexible in the sense that you can go in here and then you can customize each and every form. So for example, in your organization, along with selecting owners and deputies, you also want to select, let's say, have enter users who are internal contacts, or you have users who are external contacts, or app migration team. So these are the kinds of fields that you can come here and customize using the toolkit. So in this case, all you would have to do is create an object. For the sake of example, let me say this is just going to be a string or something. You can create this and you can drag and drop it on the form. You publish the form, and then the field is going to get reflected on your workflow immediately when you run it in the UI here. And it also offers other flexibilities, such as you want to introduce a new form altogether in this as a part of So as a part of this workflow, if you want to introduce a new form altogether in the process, then from using the orchestration toolkit, you would just come in here, you would drag and drop your form, and then you're going to decide what is the flow for this. So am I going to have this form after my application instance, or is it going to before? Is it going to be before? Or you can delete it altogether. And you can also have conditional policies that says, show me this form only if a particular condition is met, or you can hide the form altogether. So that's what these lines are that you can see here in blue and orange. These are conditional lines that let me decide that I want to show the application extension form only if some option is enabled, or only if a certain option is disabled. So all the 6 or 7 steps that we had seen there are represented via the forms. And after you click submit, the section that you see on the left-hand side, this is the work that does the heavy lifting, that calls out to Azure, that creates your resources in Azure, that creates your subsequent resources in Empower ID. And as you can see, it's very granular. We have separate activities for, these are called as activities or operations. And these are security trimmed, meaning if I am running this workflow under the identity of Aarti in this case, so it's going to check, does she have access to call this operation that creates your Azure app resource? And does she have access to add or remove owners? Does she have access to make the application requestable? Does she have access to update your eligibilities? That's the one that Patrick was talking about, the suggested, pre-approved, and eligible. And then this is the final summary page. And then at the end of the workflow, we also send out a notification email. Now, you can send this out to the requester, or you can send it out to a group of management role people, or you can send it out to all the owners that you had selected here. And it is flexible in the sense that a send, for example, let me talk about send email. Send email is an activity that is very generic that you can use in many scenarios, such as you want to create your application, you send a notification. You add or remove a secret, you want to send a notification. You make any updates to the application, you send a notification. So the idea behind that is you create a standalone activity once, and then the idea is you drag and drop it within all of your workflow so that from a developer standpoint, you don't have to worry about writing the same logic over and over again. And within the activity, you expose certain properties. So let me just go in here. Yeah. So within the activity, you expose certain properties saying what is the email template and who have to be notified. So that way the activity is the same, but it becomes contextual based on which workflow you are using this in. So this is a very short overview of our, orchestration tool and what is possible. And just to give a high level, this is just a workflow, but we have the ability to create APIs. You can create class libraries. You can create custom connectors. You can create uh, Azure components such as app services. You can create web jobs, Azure functions. Again, the whole concept behind this is you can develop, for example, if I talk about the Skim microservice that is used in here was developed using this tool itself. And you develop it within Empire ID and you can deploy it using Empire ID. So again, the whole end-to-end, the life cycle of the app service, you do not need access to Azure at all. And because in the background we use a managed identity, you obviously have to make sure from an administration perspective, they have to give the managed identity certain access. But the whole idea is, again, you can develop all of this and you can publish these components to Azure without being given direct access to Azure itself.
A question from the audience related to what you were just saying there. So Empower ID is connecting to a Skim microservice deployed in Azure as an app service. And then we're using certificate-based authentication from Empower ID to talk to that, to authenticate to that app service. But the question was, which rights does the Empower ID app service managed identity need, and who owns that? Does the customer own that identity and management of that identity?
So yes, the customer owns the management of that identity and what are the permissions that are going to be given. Because from a Skim standpoint, we can do a lot of operations. For example, all the things that you have seen here from an application perspective, but you can also do anything from groups perspective, we can do from users perspective, and any other objects that are available in Azure. But if in your organization, if you're just going to be dealing with apps and you do not want to give the managed identity access to update anything or users or groups, then you would trim your permissions on your managed identity, scope it only to what you are going to work with.
Thank you for that. And there's one other question. Where is the expose API option in the application edit mode?
So the edit is a separate workflow because, as we can see, this is the onboard workflow that you have here. But as a part of the edit, you can go in here. We have a separate workflow altogether for this. So this is this is another wizard workflow that we support. And in here, for every application, you have these options that you can edit. So they are exposed as a part of this. So again, for example, in this perspective, you can decide, do you want to delete your app? Do you want to edit the name and features? Do you want to update any token claims? Do you want to edit IAM shop settings, owners, deputies, various options. And these options are security trimmed again, because it can be security trimmed to say only if you're the owner of an application should you be able to delete the app. Whereas let's say you log in as an app migration team member and you are trying to edit the app, then they're not going to see this option. The only thing that they can do is maybe edit your name and edit the app name and features. So this is a separate workflow that we have for managing the resource once the application has been created. Now, as a part of this webinar, I do not want to get into the details of what this workflow does because we have it saved for a consequence webinar where we'll do a deep dive on each of these options and what they can do and how they are security trimmed. I hope that answers your question.
That was very helpful. So one question is, can I not give native permissions at all and force the users just to only have access to use the Empower ID workflows? And if they go to Azure, they don't have any privileges to do these things outside of this controlled system?
Yes, so you can do things and you can configure and have your RBAC policy set in such a way that you can do these actions only in Empower ID. Because again, the permissions that a user has in Azure, you can trim it and they need not have an overlap with what you are doing in Empower. You can choose to have an overlap or you can choose not to have that overlap. So for example, if now for my user, I have God level access. So I can do actions, both in Azure, as you can see, both in Empower ID and in Azure. But as a app migration team member, for example, which is one of those personas which gets used across organizations, you can say they can do things only in Empower ID, but in Azure, they do not have any access to do any of the operations, or the only thing that they can do is view the applications, but nothing more than that. But in Empower ID, you can trim it further to say what is possible. For example, this is one of the scenarios that we had seen at our clients. So what they wanted was they have two personas. You have your app owner and you have your migration team. So from an app owner perspective, so in this case, let's say you have this EID guest user. So from an app owner perspective, I can do things only to the apps that I am an owner of. I should not be able to manage or edit any apps for which I am not an owner. In this case, I have this app where Manjusha is the owner. So as a guest user, I should not be able to do anything for her app. But as an app migration team member, because they manage the entire infrastructure and all the apps that have been created across the board for the organization, they can come in and they can edit all the apps. They can create secrets for all the apps. They can delete, maybe not delete secrets. Maybe they can create secrets for all the app. They can update permissions. But again, from an app owner perspective, you can do things only within the context of the app that you are an owner of.
Gotcha. Okay, that's great. That's great. I think we're out of time unless anybody has any last minute questions in the chat. I want to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate everyone taking time out. We hope this was informative. If you didn't get your questions answered, feel free to shoot us off an email. We're happy to answer them via email or jump on a call. And yeah, but thank you for all attending. We know your time's valuable, so thank you for showing up. And thank you, Arti. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the good info.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.